He was sitting on the edge of a hospital bed, the thin cotton of the standard issue gown doing little to ward off the room's clinical chill. Opposite him, a man stood with an unnerving stillness. The man's dark hair was impeccably styled, framing a face of severe angles and a gaze that was deep-set and intense. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that exuded an air of disciplined power, a stark contrast to Ethan's own disheveled state. This man, Ethan somehow knew, was like him, a force to be reckoned with, not deferred to. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Ethan fought the primal urge to assert his own dominance, to flood the sterile air with an invisible challenge. Finally, the man broke the quiet, his voice a low rumble. He questioned if Ethan found it amusing, this elaborate charade of bringing him here, addressing him by his full name, Ethan Vance, with a distinct lack of warmth. Ethan's own response was clipped and cold. He demanded to know who the man was, feigning ignorance of any prior acquaintance. He wondered aloud what kind of game this was. From the side, Jeremy, his perpetually nervous beta assistant, timidly interjected. He explained to the man, whom he called Mr. Reed, that the doctor had confirmed a head injury and partial memory loss. The man, Caleb, glanced at Ethan, a disdainful smile touching his lips as he repeated the word amnesia, questioning if Ethan had truly forgotten him. Jeremy awkwardly confirmed that it seemed to be the case. Ethan seized the opening, turning to his assistant and asking for the man's full name again. Jeremy reintroduced him as Caleb Reed. Ethan looked back at the imposing figure. He asked Caleb Reed what he wanted from him. Caleb's jaw tightened, his patience clearly wearing thin. He reminded Ethan that it was Jeremy who had called him, at Ethan's request, after he had supposedly fallen down a flight of stairs and demanded Caleb come take care of him. A flicker of realization, or perhaps misunderstanding, crossed Ethan's face. He asked if Caleb was his nurse, remarking on his improbable handsomeness for the role. Caleb's reply was laced with sarcasm. He referred to Ethan as Mr. Vance, suggesting that men of his station were prone to forgetfulness. He then reminded Ethan of a sponsorship contract they had signed 4 years prior, pointedly asking who Ethan thought he was. Ethan audibly gasped at the word sponsor. He let his eyes travel up and down Caleb's form. Objectively, Caleb was taller, his frame broader and more powerful than his own. This wasn't the type he went for. He preferred them slender, more pliant. He questioned when his tastes had become so robust. Covering his face, he pleaded for a moment to process. He clarified that he, Ethan, had been the one to initiate the sponsorship. Caleb sneered, correcting him that passive was a more accurate term. He had been taken care of. Ethan dropped his hands, insisting it was impossible, absolutely out of the question. But when his gaze met Caleb's unyielding stare, he knew the man wasn't joking. He swallowed hard, cautiously probing further, asking who, in their arrangement, was the dominant partner. He couldn't imagine himself in a subordinate position. He had always been the one in control. Caleb sidestepped the question, his voice sharp with annoyance. He stated that since Ethan had forgotten everything, they should just end their relationship. The finality was abrupt, but Ethan found he didn't care. He shrugged, agreeing it was for the best. He then turned his attention back to Jeremy, inquiring about the sponsorship contract and whether there were potential legal or financial entanglements to worry about. Caleb spoke first, stating that Ethan had paid him a lump sum of $5 million, which he had already repaid with interest. Ethan was relieved to hear there would be no disputes, remarking that it was most important for them to settle things cleanly. Before he could finish, Caleb stood abruptly. He announced his departure, telling Ethan to rest well. Ethan felt a peculiar sense of relief as Caleb walked away, waving a dismissive hand and telling him to take care. He instructed Jeremy to see him out. Caleb's voice cut across the room, mercilessly stating that Jeremy should stay and watch over Ethan. At the door, Caleb paused and glanced back. Ethan asked if there was something else. Caleb's parting words were telling Ethan not to regret his decision to end things, before he left without another look. Ethan immediately rounded on Jeremy, demanding to know how he could have been involved with someone so arrogant. He wondered aloud if he had some masochistic streak he was unaware of. Jeremy cautiously suggested that perhaps Ethan should try to reconcile with Caleb, that he might regret it once his memory returned. Ethan stared in disbelief, scoffing at the ridiculousness of the idea. He, who moved through lovers like a bee through a garden, would never regret losing one kept man. Jeremy fell silent. Ethan rubbed the back of his head, which still throbbed from the fall he'd taken on the stairs of his own hotel that afternoon. He grew impatient, telling Jeremy to ask the doctor when he could be discharged. Jeremy returned with the news that the doctor recommended an overnight observation but would allow him to leave if he signed a waiver. Ethan declared the injury minor and demanded to be discharged immediately. While Jeremy handled the paperwork, Ethan donned his suit and scrolled through his phone. In the hospital parking garage, he noticed a private message thread with a contact saved as Bunny. The last message sent from his phone, 3 hours prior, was a summons to Caleb. A chill went down his spine. He couldn't fathom giving such a demeaning nickname to a man of Caleb's imposing stature. He opened the message history. A series of desperate, one-sided texts revealed a past self he didn't recognize. He had accused Caleb of running off to see an Alexis, demanded he return his calls, and left a petulant, threatening message. This Alexis, he vaguely recalled, was his cousin, an omega of notable talent and beauty who had been studying abroad. It seemed Caleb had a connection to her. The chat log was a humiliating chronicle of his attempts to please Caleb, buying him designer clothes and sending him money on holidays with cheesy romantic codes. Caleb's responses were sparse and dismissive, a few curt words for every 10 of Ethan's fawning sentences. Ethan cursed under his breath, disgusted by his past self's pathetic behavior. By now, he was in the back of his town car, with Jeremy driving away from the hospital. He leaned forward, demanding to know what leverage Caleb had held over him. Jeremy was evasive, claiming ignorance. Ethan pressed, unable to comprehend why he would spend $5 million on a man who was so clearly not his type. Jeremy tactfully suggested that Ethan look through the photos and videos of Caleb on his phone, hoping it might jog his memory. Taking the advice, Ethan opened his gallery and found several albums dedicated to Caleb, chronologically titled Bunny at 17, Bunny at 18, and so on. He had known him since he was a teenager. He hesitantly opened the first album. The photos showed a strikingly beautiful boy, fair-skinned with large, expressive eyes and a smile that revealed slightly prominent front teeth. For a moment, he didn't recognize him. This boy was delicate, almost ethereal, the exact type Ethan found irresistible. This was Caleb. He scrolled quickly through the years. The photos were mostly candids of Caleb, though a few showed him with Alexis, wearing what looked like matching prep school blazers. They were classmates. As he moved to the albums for ages 18 and 19, the transformation was jarring. The smile vanished. The soft features hardened into sharp angles. His body, once lean, had broadened and packed on muscle as if he'd been mainlining growth hormones. In just a few years, the sweet, lovely boy had morphed into a cold, formidable man. Doing the math, Ethan realized the crux of the problem. He had signed the contract 4 years ago, when Caleb was 18 and still the boy he desired. Soon after, Caleb had undergone this dramatic change, becoming bigger and stronger than Ethan himself. He blurted out that it was a bait and switch. The product was not as advertised. Startled, Jeremy nearly swerved. Ethan demanded an explanation, asking how he could have continued the arrangement after Caleb had changed so drastically. Jeremy explained awkwardly that he wasn't privy to their private life, but knew Ethan had cared for him deeply. He mentioned that Ethan had quit smoking and drinking for Caleb, had been completely devoted, and had even paid off a significant debt for him. When Ethan asked about the debt, Jeremy recounted the story of Caleb's family's downfall when he was 18. His father imprisoned, his mother gravely ill, his younger brother's education at risk. The $5 million had saved them. The pieces clicked into place. Ethan sat back, crossing his legs. It seemed he had used his money to take advantage of someone in a desperate situation. But then, puzzlingly, he had somehow become the subservient one. The thought was galling. He subconsciously reached for a cigarette before remembering he had quit. He grumbled about how much he had compromised himself for someone who clearly didn't appreciate it. The anger simmered, and he made a decision. He told Jeremy to drive to the Velvet Orchid. The Velvet Orchid was an exclusive club run by a friend, filled with beautiful, willing young men. He had given it all up for Caleb, a single, flawed tree in a vast forest. He thanked whatever divine intervention caused his amnesia for freeing him from his love-addled stupor. Jeremy hesitated, reminding Ethan that he had promised Caleb he wouldn't go to such places anymore. Ethan kicked the back of the driver's seat and snarled, asking who signed his paychecks. Jeremy fell silent. Half an hour later, Ethan was ensconced in a plush, private booth, flanked by 6 beautiful young men in revealing attire. They catered to his every whim, feeding him fruit and pouring his champagne. One, who couldn't squeeze onto the couch, danced seductively before him, hips swaying to the deep bass of the music. Ethan raised his glass, encouraging them to continue. A young man wearing a pair of playful bunny ears nestled into his side. Ethan wrapped an arm around him, toying with the ears. The young man's voice was a breathy whisper as he asked if Ethan liked what he saw. Ethan tipped his chin up, purring that he was cute, just like a bunny. This was the kind of bunny he liked, not the hulking brute Caleb had become. Just as the thought crossed his mind, the door to the booth was kicked open with violent force. Caleb strode in, his face a mask of cold fury. The club manager trailed behind him, pleading for him not to cause a scene. Caleb ignored him, his eyes locking onto Ethan holding the young man. A murderous glint flashed in his gaze. He grabbed the young man by his collar and roughly tossed him aside. The boy cried out as he hit the floor, and the others scattered in fear. Before Ethan could utter a protest, the world tilted as Caleb hoisted him over his shoulder. He struggled, shouting, but no one dared to intervene. Caleb carried him through the club and into the parking garage. His driver opened the rear door of the town car, and Ethan was unceremoniously dumped into the back seat. Caleb slid in after him, slamming the door shut. The car peeled out of the garage. Dizzy, Ethan scrambled upright and yelled at Caleb, demanding to know where he was being taken. Caleb's anger was a palpable force in the enclosed space. He grabbed Ethan's jaw with one hand, his voice a low growl. He snarled about Ethan's audacity, coming to a place like this and letting other men touch him after everything he'd promised. Before Ethan could retort that it was none of his business, Caleb leaned in and inhaled deeply at the side of his neck. The sensation of his nose brushing against his skin sent an involuntary shiver through him. He flinched, asking if Caleb was a dog. He shoved him away, but saw twin flames ignite in Caleb's dark eyes. Caleb's voice was a venomous whisper as he declared that Ethan reeked. Without another word, he retrieved a can of air freshener from the glove compartment and sprayed it directly at Ethan. The cloying lemon scent filled Ethan's lungs, and he erupted into a fit of sneezes. Caleb coolly lowered the window and instructed the driver to turn up the air conditioning. The powerful blast of wind slowly cleared the scent, but Ethan's eyes were streaming. As he fumbled for a tissue, Caleb continued his tirade, ordering him to throw away all his clothes and wash himself clean, threatening violence if he ever smelled another man on him again. Humiliation burned through him. His rage peaked. He threw the tissue aside and seized Caleb's collar. His voice shook with fury as he demanded to know who gave Caleb the right to speak to him that way. Caleb's thick hand enveloped his fist, and his expression shifted into something unreadable, a mix of exasperation and a strange, possessive fondness. He said that Ethan had certainly succeeded in making him angry, but warned him never to go to that club again. Ethan didn't wait for him to finish. He swung. The punch landed squarely, snapping Caleb's head to the side. Caleb touched his jaw in disbelief, then slowly turned back, his eyes dark. Ethan screamed that it wasn't Caleb's place to control him. He yelled for the driver to stop. The car continued. He tried the door. It was locked. He screamed at Caleb again to stop the car, that he wanted out. A dangerous light flickered in Caleb's eyes. His only response was to press a button, and a partition silently rose, sealing them off from the driver. Before Ethan could process what was happening, Caleb lunged, pushing him down onto the leather seat. For all his life, Ethan had been the victor in any fight, the one who commanded respect and desire. Now, pinned beneath another man, he felt utterly powerless. Caleb's mouth crashed down on his, a bruising, desperate kiss that was more of a battle than an embrace. His tongue forced its way past Ethan's teeth, plundering, demanding surrender. Ethan whimpered, trying to turn his head, but Caleb's hand clamped onto the back of his skull, holding him fast. The oxygen was stolen from his lungs. To his horror, his body betrayed him. His hands crept up to grip Caleb's shoulders, his legs parting to wrap around Caleb's waist. It was a terrifying, ingrained muscle memory. He cursed himself internally, his pride shattering. The man he kept was not a pet bird, but a bird of prey. Caleb's lips moved to his ear, his teeth gently grazing his earlobe. A shudder racked Ethan's body. He held onto his last shred of defiance and shoved Caleb away, his voice breaking as he told him not to touch him. The words were meant to be a curse, but they came out as a hoarse plea. Caleb licked his lips, his eyes flushed, his breathing ragged. He rasped that if Ethan hadn't smelled of others, he would have taken him right there in the car. The air thickened with an invisible charge, an undeniable chemistry that both repulsed and drew them together. It confirmed Ethan's suspicion. Caleb was made for him, otherwise this maddening obsession made no sense. He stated harshly that they were over and that Caleb should leave him alone. Whatever madness had possessed him before was gone now that his mind was clear. Caleb, however, seemed to hear a different conversation. He claimed that Ethan was just making a scene, angry that he had gone to pick up Alexis from the airport without telling him. He tried to justify it, saying she was Ethan's cousin and his classmate, a simple act of friendship. He then started to say something about Ethan not being any different, but stopped himself. The sheer audacity of it left Ethan speechless. He sputtered that he had no memory of his past behavior, but he could say with absolute clarity now that he was done. He didn't want to play anymore. Caleb was stunned into silence, dully asking if he truly remembered nothing. Ethan snapped back, questioning if Caleb had a hearing problem. Just then, the car came to a stop and the doors unlocked. Ethan scrambled out without a second thought. Caleb followed. They were in the underground garage of Ethan's building. He used facial recognition to enter, and Caleb followed him step by step. Ethan angrily demanded to know why Caleb was following him. Caleb's reply was simple. He was going home. Ethan scoffed that this was his home, telling him to get out. Caleb remained impassive, following him into the elevator and using his own fingerprint to unlock the apartment door. Ethan finally fell silent, realizing he couldn't get rid of this man. Inside, the shoe cabinet was filled with pairs of their shoes, many of them matching couple styles. In the living room, on a shelf, sat a pair of clumsy-looking, hand-painted ceramic mugs, one with a malformed rabbit, the other a misshapen rat. Caleb coolly informed him that Ethan himself had insisted on making them at a pottery class, despite their shared lack of artistic talent. His silence was deafening. He was born in the year of the rat. The rabbit was Caleb. He couldn't believe he had engaged in such childishly sentimental activities. As he stood there, reeling, Caleb's phone rang. Ethan's sharp eyes caught the caller ID, Alexis. Caleb glanced at him before answering on speaker. Alexis's tearful voice came through the phone, complaining that her power was out and she didn't know what to do. She called him Callie, a nickname so cloying it made Ethan's stomach turn. Caleb calmly suggested she check the circuit breaker. Alexis played the helpless damsel, claiming she wouldn't know where to find it and asking if he could come over. Caleb glanced at Ethan again. Ethan sneered, telling him to go, not to keep the little beauty waiting. Hearing his voice, Alexis quickly changed her tune, saying that if he was with Ethan, he shouldn't come, that she wouldn't want to cause a misunderstanding. Tired of her theatrics, Ethan walked into his bedroom. The room was a shrine to their coupling. Paired pillows, pajamas, razors. A framed photo on the nightstand showed Caleb holding a birthday cake with a stoic expression, while Ethan beamed at the camera beside him like a fool in love. The sight made him sick. He, who had always lived by a creed of casual, no-strings-attached encounters, had been playing house with a man 4 years his junior for years. He must have been possessed. He grabbed a towel and went to take a shower. The hot water sluiced over him, and the tension in his shoulders began to ease. He found himself thinking that only a fool would believe Caleb and Alexis were just friends. But as he chided himself for caring, he recalled Alexis's profile picture on Caleb's phone. He had seen it somewhere before. He shut off the water, hastily dried himself, and ran back to the bedroom. On his own phone, in his recent contacts, he found her. He had saved her number as Alexis the Snake. He laughed out loud. He opened their chat history and saw a record of a video call from that very afternoon, right around the time he'd had his accident. He racked his brain, trying to remember what they could have possibly discussed. Giving up, he decided it didn't matter. He was hungry. He walked out to the living room and stopped short. Caleb was in the kitchen, wearing an apron over his shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He was just placing a steaming bowl of homemade chicken noodle soup on the dining table. The aroma was rich and inviting. Caleb set down a pair of chopsticks, telling him to eat before his stomach started acting up again. Ethan knew his recurring gastritis was a result of years of hard drinking and poor eating habits. Unable to resist the comforting meal, he sat down and began to eat. As Caleb washed the pot in the kitchen, Ethan asked why he was still there, wondering about Alexis and her power outage. Caleb replied without turning around that he had sent his own assistant to handle it, guessing it was nothing serious. Ethan was surprised he hadn't rushed to her side. After Caleb finished in the kitchen, he told Ethan to leave the bowl in the sink. He would wash it later. He then walked toward the adjacent study, pausing at the door to say that Ethan should go to sleep when he was done, as he had work to do. Ethan glanced at the clock. It was nearly 11. The man who had looked ready to devour him in the car was now acting like a calm, domestic partner. After finishing the soup, Ethan leaned against the study doorframe, watching. Caleb, wearing reading glasses, was focused on his laptop. Without looking up, he asked what was wrong. Ethan deliberately teased him, asking if they weren't sleeping together. Caleb glanced at him over the rim of his glasses, stating coolly that since Ethan had lost his memory, he wouldn't touch him. Ethan shrugged, remarking on his principles. As he turned to leave, a vivid memory fragment hit him like a physical blow. He saw himself in this very spot, wrapping his arms around Caleb from behind as he worked. He felt his own breath tickle Caleb's ear as he asked if work was more fun than him. He saw Caleb turn away, a faint blush on his cheeks, muttering that he wanted to earn the money to pay Ethan back. He heard his own dismissive laugh, telling him the $5 million was nothing, that what was his was Caleb's. He saw his own hands unbuttoning Caleb's shirt, his voice a low, seductive drawl, saying he didn't stay with him just to watch him work overtime. He remembered Caleb's muttered curse as he swept him into his arms and carried him to the bedroom. Ethan shuddered, rubbing the goosebumps from his arms, and fled. The next day at the office, he was exhausted. He'd been plagued by fragmented dreams of a younger Caleb with wide, innocent eyes, and an older Caleb who promised to dominate him until he couldn't walk. During his lunch break, a message popped up on his phone from Mark from Opulent Events. Mark was asking if he was dissatisfied with the plan, noting that he had canceled their order. Ethan scrolled through their chat history, finding numerous plans and renderings for what looked like a lavish party. Mark sent another message, mentioning they still had a week and could make any necessary changes. A week? Before he could ask, his office door opened and Caleb walked in. He pulled Ethan up from the sofa, telling him it was time for lunch. Ethan protested, but Caleb dragged him to the private elevator that led to the garage. He must have dozed off because he woke up at a private restaurant, being led to a quiet booth with a view of a tranquil courtyard. The waiter served 4 dishes and a soup without being asked, all of Ethan's favorites. Caleb ladled soup into his bowl, him to let it cool. The schizophrenia was back. The tender caregiver had replaced yesterday's tyrant. As he sipped his soup, a soft voice called his name. He turned to see a striking young man in his early 20s, impeccably dressed and adorned with tasteful jewelry. His face was exquisitely beautiful, exactly Ethan's type. The young man, Julian, smiled sweetly and greeted Caleb with a nod. They exchanged pleasantries about the coincidence of meeting there. Julian mentioned his design studio had moved and promised to send Ethan the new address, offering his services anytime. As he watched Julian walk away, a dopey grin plastered on his face. Caleb's icy voice cut through his reverie, asking if he had seen enough. His face was thunderous. Ethan snapped back to reality, asking what the problem was. Caleb sneered, questioning if Ethan really thought a simple look was all it was. As Ethan tried to feign ignorance, Caleb fell silent, turning away in anger. Just then, Julian sent his new location. Ethan saw that he had saved his contact as Julian Ring Design. He opened their chat and saw a history of design sketches for matching rings, along with a note about an inscription. As he frowned, Caleb's hand slammed down on his phone screen. Ethan looked up, about to curse him out, but Caleb's fury was greater. He demanded to know if Ethan thought he was dead. Ethan shot back, asking why he was acting so crazy. Caleb accused him of carrying on with other men right in front of him, yet having the audacity to question him about Alexis. Ethan argued that he had just been saying hello. Caleb laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. He declared he had evidence. He pulled out his own phone and showed Ethan a series of photos. It was him and Julian, sitting in a coffee shop downstairs from his company, talking and laughing intimately. Caleb continued his accusation, saying he had stewed soup for Ethan 2 days ago and had stumbled upon their secret meeting. He raged that Ethan had wronged him first, yet dared to point the finger. Ethan stared at the photos, his mind blank, and raised a hand to silence him.